The Occult Part 2. The idea of occult sciences developed in the 16th century. The term usually encompassed three practices: astrology, alchemy, and natural magic, although sometimes various forms of divination were also included rather than being subsumed under natural magic. These were grouped together because, according to the Dutch scholar of Hermeticism Wouter Hanegraaff, each one of them engaged in a systematic investigation of nature and natural processes in the context of theoretical frameworks that relied heavily on a belief in occult qualities, virtues, or forces. Although there are areas of overlap between these different occult sciences, they are separate, and in some cases practitioners of one would reject the others as being illegitimate. During the Age of Enlightenment, occultism increasingly came to be seen as intrinsically incompatible with the concept of science. From that point on, use of occult sciences implied a conscious polemic against mainstream science. Nevertheless, the philosopher and card game historian Michael Demet, whose analysis of the historical evidence suggested that fortune-telling and occult interpretations using cards were unknown before the 18th century, said that the term occult science was not misplaced because people who believe in the possibility of unveiling the future or of exercising supernormal powers do so because the efficacy of the methods they employ coheres with some systematic conception which they hold of the way the universe functions, however flimsy its empirical basis. In his 1871 book Primitive Culture, the anthropologist Edward Tylor used the term occult science as a synonym for magic. Occult qualities are properties that have no known rational explanation. In the Middle Ages, for example, magnetism was considered an occult quality. Ether is another such element. Newton's contemporaries severely criticized his theory that gravity was affected through action at a distance as occult. In the English-speaking world, notable figures in the development of occultism included Helena Blavatsky and other figures associated with her Theosophical Society. Senior figures in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, like William Wynne Westcott and Samuel Liddell MacGregor Mathers, as well as other individuals such as Pascal Beverly Randolph, Emma Hardinge Britten, Arthur Edward Wade, and in the early 20th century Aleister Crowley, Dion Fortune, and Israel Regardie. By the end of the 19th century, occultist ideas had also spread into other parts of Europe, such as the German Empire, Austria-Hungary, and the Kingdom of Italy. Unlike older forms of esotericism, occultism does not necessarily reject scientific progress or modernity. Levi had stressed the need to solve the conflict between science and religion, something that he believed could be achieved by turning to what he thought was the ancient wisdom found in magic. The French scholar of Western esotericism, Antoine Faivre, noted that rather than outright accepting the triumph of scientism, occultists sought an alternative solution, trying to integrate scientific progress or modernity with a global vision that will serve to make the vacuousness of materialism more apparent. The Dutch scholar of Hermeticism Wouter Hanegraaff remarked that occultism was essentially an attempt to adapt esotericism to the disenchanted world, a post-Enlightenment society in which growing scientific discovery had eradicated the dimension of irreducible mystery previously present. In doing so, he noted, occultism distanced itself from the traditional esotericism, which accepted the premise of an enchanted world. According to the British historian of Western esotericism Nicholas Goodrick Clark, occultist groups typically seek proofs and demonstrations by recourse to scientific tests or terminology. In his work about Levi, the German historian of religion Julian Struby has argued that the occultist wish for a synthesis of religion, science, and philosophy directly resulted from the context of contemporary socialism and progressive Catholicism. Similar to spiritualism, but in declared opposition to it. The emergence of occultism should thus be seen within the context of radical social reform, which was often concerned with establishing new forms of scientific religion, while at the same time propagating the revival of an ancient tradition of true religion. Indeed, the emergence of both modern esotericism and socialism in July monarchy France have been inherently intertwined. Another feature of occultists is that, unlike earlier esotericists, they often openly distance themselves from Christianity, in some cases, like that of Crowley, even adopting explicitly anti-Christian stances. This reflected how pervasive the influence of secularization had been on all areas of European society. In rejecting Christianity, these occultists sometimes turned towards pre-Christian belief systems and embraced forms of modern paganism, while others instead took influence from the religions of Asia, such as Hinduism and Buddhism. In various cases, certain occultists did both. Another characteristic of these occultists was the emphasis that they placed on the spiritual realization of the individual, an idea that would strongly influence the 20th century New Age and human potential movement. This spiritual realization was encouraged both through traditional Western occult sciences like alchemy and ceremonial magic, but by the start of the 20th century had also begun to include practices drawn from non-Western contexts, such as yoga. Although occultism is distinguished from earlier forms of esotericism, many occultists have also been involved in older esoteric currents. For instance, occultists like François-Charles Barlet and Rudolf Steiner were also theosophers that, when adhering to the ideas of the early modern Lutheran thinker Jacob Boehme and seeking to integrate ideas from Bohemian theosophy and occultism. It has been noted, however, that this distancing from the Theosophical Society should be understood in the light of polemical identity formations among esotericists towards the end of the 19th century. In the mid-1990s, a new definition of occultism was put forth by Wouter Hanegraaff. According to Hanegraaff, the term occultism can be used not only for the 19th century groups, which openly self-described using that term, but can also be used in reference to the type of esotericism that they represent. Seeking to define occultism so that the term would be suitable as an etic category for scholars, Hanegraaff devised the following definition: a category in the study of religions which comprises all attempts by esotericists to come to terms with a disenchanted world, or, alternatively, by people in general to make sense of esotericism from the perspective of a disenchanted secular world. Hanegraaff noted that this etic usage of the term would be independent of emic usages of the term employed by occultists and other esotericists themselves. In this definition, occultism covers many esoteric currents that have developed from the mid-19th century onward, including spiritualism, theosophy, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and the New Age. Employing this etic understanding of occultism, Hanegraaff argued that its development could begin to be seen in the work of the Swedish esotericist Emanuel Swedenborg and in the mesmerist movement of the 18th century. Although added that occultism only emerged in fully developed form as spiritualism, a movement that developed in the United States during the mid-19th century. Marco Pazzi suggested that the use of Hanegraaff's definition might cause confusion by presenting a group of 19th century esotericists who called themselves occultists as just one part of a broader category of esotericists whom scholars would call occultists. Following these discussions, Julian Struby argued that Levi and other contemporary authors who would now be regarded as esotericists developed their ideas not against the background of an esoteric tradition in the first place. Rather, Levi's notion of occultism emerged in the context of highly influential radical socialist movements and widespread progressive, so-called neo-Catholic ideas. This further complicates Hanegraaff's characteristics of occultism, since, throughout the 19th century, they apply to these reformist movements rather than to a supposed group of esotericists. The term occult has also been used as a substantivized adjective as the occult, a term that has been particularly widely used among journalists and sociologists. This term was popularized by the publication of Colin Wilson's 1971 book, The Occult. This term has been used as an intellectual wastebasket into which a wide array of beliefs and practices have been placed because they do not fit readily into the categories of religion or science. According to Hanegraaff, the occult is a category into which gets placed a range of beliefs from spirits or fairies to parapsychological experiments, from UFO abductions to Oriental mysticism, from vampire legends to channeling, and so on. The neologism occulture used within the industrial music scene of the late 20th century was probably coined by one of its central figures, the musician and occultist Genesis P-Orridge. The scholar of religion Christopher Partridge used the term in an academic sense, stating that occulture was the new spiritual environment in the West, the reservoir feeding new spiritual springs, the soil in which new spiritualities are growing. Recently, scholars have offered perspectives on the occult as intertwined with media and technology. Examples include the work of film and media theorist Jeffrey Sconce and religious studies scholar John Durham Peters, both of whom suggest that occult movements historically utilize media and apparatuses as tools to reveal hidden aspects of reality or laws of nature. Eric Davis, in his book Technosis, gives an overview of occultism both ancient and modern from the perspective of cybernetics and information technologies. Philosopher Eugene Thacker discusses Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy in his book In the Dust of This Planet, where he shows how the horror genre utilizes occult themes to reveal hidden realities. Animal magnetism, also known as mesmerism, is a theory invented by German doctor Franz Mesmer in the 18th century. It posits the existence of an invisible natural force, Lebensmagnetismus, possessed by all living things, including humans, animals, and vegetables. He claimed that the force could have physical effects, including healing. The vitalist theory attracted numerous followers in Europe and the United States and was popular into the 19th century. Practitioners were often known as magnetizers rather than mesmerists. It had an important influence in medicine for about 75 years from its beginnings in 1779 and continued to have some influence for another 50 years. Hundreds of books were written on the subject between 1766 and 1925, but it is no longer practiced today except as a form of alternative medicine in some places. This theory also had a strong influence on the development of Cartesiism. The terms magnetizer and mesmerizer have been applied to people who study and practice animal magnetism. These terms have been distinguished from mesmerist and magnetist, which are regarded as denoting those who study animal magnetism without being practitioners, and from hypnotist, someone who practices hypnosis. The etymology of the word magnetizer comes from the French magnetiser practicing the methods of mesmerism, which in turn is derived from the French verb magnetiser. The term refers to an individual who has the power to manipulate the magnetic fluid with effects upon other people present that were regarded as analogous to magnetic effects. This sense of the term is found, for example, in the expression of Antoine Joseph Gorses, "The magnetizer is the imam of vital energy." A tendency emerged amongst British magnetizers to call their clinical techniques mesmerism. They wanted to distance themselves from the theoretical orientation of animal magnetism that was based on the concept of magnetic fluid. At the time, some magnetizers attempted to channel what they thought was a magnetic fluid, and sometimes they attempted this with a laying on of hands that reported effects included of various feelings: intense heat, trembling, trances and seizures. Many practitioners took a scientific approach, such as Joseph Philippe François Deleuze, 1753 to 1835, a French physician, anatomist, gynecologist, and physicist. One of his pupils was Theodore Leger, 1799 to 1853, who wrote that the label mesmerism was most improper, noting that by 1846 that the term galvanism had been replaced by electricity. Leger wrote that year, mesmerism of all the names proposed to replace the term animal magnetism is decidedly the most improper. For in the first place, no true science has ever been designated by the name of a man, whatever be the claims he could urge in his favor. And secondly, what are the claims of Mesmer for such an honor? He is not the inventor of the practical part of the science, since we can trace the practice of it through the most remote ages, and in that respect, the part which he introduced has been completely abandoned. He proposed for it a theory which in 1846 exploded and which, on account of his errors, has been fatal to our progress. He never spoke of the phenomena which have rehabilitated our cause among scientific men, and since nothing remains to be attributed to Mesmer, either in the practice and theory, or the discoveries that constitute our science, why should it be called mesmerism? In 1784, two French royal commissions appointed by Louis XVI studied Mesmer's magnetic fluid theory to try to establish it by scientific evidence. The commission of the Academy of Sciences included Majolt, Benjamin Franklin, Jean-Sylvain Bailly, Jean-Baptiste Le Roy, Salin, Jean Darcet, de Bory, Joseph-Ignace Guillotin, and Antoine Lavoisier. The Commission of the Royal Society of Medicine was composed of Poissonnier, Caille, Mauduit de la Varenne, André, and Antoine Laurent de Jussieu. Whilst the commission agreed that the cures claimed by Mesmer were indeed cures, it also concluded there was no evidence of the existence of his magnetic fluid, and that its effects derived from either the imaginations of its subjects or charlatanry. A generation later, another investigating committee, appointed by a majority vote in 1826 in the Royal Academy of Medicine in Paris, studied the effects and clinical potentials of the mesmeric procedure, without trying to establish the physical nature of any magnetic fluidum. The report says, "What we have seen in the course of our experiments bears no sort of resemblance to what the report of 1784 relates with regard to the magnetizers of that period. We neither admit nor reject the existence of the fluid because we have not verified the fact. We do not speak of the baquet nor of the assemblage of a great number of people together who were magnetized in the presence of a crowd of witnesses, because all our experiments were made in the most complete stillness and always upon a single person at a time. We do not speak of the crisis. Among the conclusions were: magnetism has taken effect upon persons of different sexes and ages. In general, magnetism does not act upon persons in a sound state of health. Neither does it act upon all sick persons. However, we may conclude with certainty that this state exists when it gives rise to the development of new faculties which have been designated by the names of clairvoyance, intuition, internal provision, or when it produces great changes in the physical economy, such as insensibility, a sudden and considerable increase of strength, and when these effects cannot be referred to any other cause. We can not only act upon the magnetized person, but even place him in a complete state of somnambulism and bring him out of it without his knowledge, out of his sight at a certain distance and with doors intervening. The greater number of the somnambulists whom we have seen were completely insensible. We might pinch their skin so as to leave a mark, prick them with pins under the nails, without producing any pain, without even their perceiving it. Finally, we saw one who was insensible to one of the most painful operations in surgery and who did not manifest the slightest emotion in her countenance, her pulse, or her respiration. Magnetism is as intense and as speedily felt at a distance of 6 feet as of 6 inches, and the phenomena developed are the same in both cases. Magnetism ought to be allowed a place within the circle of medical sciences. The interior view, the drawing room scene with many people sitting and standing around a large table. A man on a crutch has an iron band wrapped around his ankle. Others in the group are holding bands similarly. To the left, a man has magnetized a woman. Instant sleep. Miscellaneous effects of paralysis, partial and complete catalepsy, partial or complete attraction. Phrenomagnetic effects. Musical ecstasy and sensitivity to physical pain and instant awakening transfusion of magnetic power to others. Abbe Faria was one of the disciples of Franz Anton Mesmer, who continued with Mesmer's work following the conclusions of the Royal Commission. In the early 19th century, Abbe Faria is said to have introduced Oriental hypnosis to Paris and to have conducted experiments to prove that no special force was necessary for the production of the mesmeric phenomena such as the trance, but that the determining cause lay within the subject himself. In other words, that it worked purely by the power of suggestion. Hypnotism, a designation coined by the Scottish surgeon James Braid, originates in Braid's response to an 1841 exhibition of animal magnetism by Charles Le Fontaine in Manchester. Writing in 1851, Braid was adamant that, in the absence of the sorts of higher phenomena reportedly produced by the mesmerists, and in contradistinction to the transcendental, i.e., metaphysical mesmerism of the mesmerists, allegedly induced through the transmission of an occult influence from the body of the operator to that of the subject. Hypnotism, by which I mean a peculiar condition of the nervous system into which it can be thrown by artificial contrivance. A theoretical position that is entirely consistent with generally admitted principles in physiological and psychological science, would, therefore, be most aptly designated rational mesmerism. While there is a great range of theories and practices collectively denoted mesmerism, research has clearly identified that there are substantial and significant differences between mesmerism and hypnotism, however they may be defined. A 1791 London publication explains Mesmer's theory of the vital fluid. Modern philosophy has admitted a plenum or universal principle of fluid matter which occupies all space, and that is all bodies moving in the world. Abound with pores, this fluid matter introduces itself through the interstices and returns backwards and forwards, flowing through one body by the currents which issue therefrom to another, as in a magnet, which produces that phenomenon which we call animal magnetism. This fluid consists of fire, air, and spirit, and like all other fluids, tends to an equilibrium. Therefore, it is easy to conceive how the efforts which the bodies make towards each other produce animal electricity, which in fact is no more than the effect produced between two bodies, one of which has more motion than the other, a phenomenon serving to prove that the body which has most motion communicates it to the other, until the medium of motion becomes an equilibrium between the two bodies. And then this equality of motion produces animal electricity. According to an anonymous writer of a series of letters published by editor John Pearson in 1790, animal magnetism can cause a wide range of effects ranging from vomiting to what is termed the crisis. The purpose of the treatment, inducing the crisis, was to shock the body into convulsion in order to remove obstructions in the humoral system that were causing sicknesses. Furthermore, this anonymous supporter of the animal magnetism theory purported that the crisis created two effects. First, a state in which the individual who is completely reduced under magnetic influence. Although he should seem to be possessed of his senses, yet he ceases to be an accountable creature, and a second remarkable state which would be conferred upon the magnetized subject, namely that of perfect and unobstructed vision. In other words, all opacity is removed, and every object becomes luminous and transparent. A patient under crisis was believed to be able to see through the body and find the cause of illness, either in themselves or in other patients. The Marquis of Pisgur's miraculous healing of a young man named Victor in 1784 was attributed to and used as evidence in support of this crisis treatment. The Marquis was allegedly able to hypnotize Victor, and, while hypnotized, Victor was said to have been able to speak articulately and diagnose his own sickness. Jacob Mello discusses in his book some mechanisms by which the perceived effects of animal magnetism have been claimed to operate. The study of animal magnetism spurred the creation of the Societies of Harmony in France, where members paid to join and learn the practice of magnetism. Dr. John Bell was a member of the Philosophical Harmonic Society of Paris and was certified by the Society to lecture and teach on animal magnetism in England. The existence of the societies transformed animal magnetism into a secretive art, where its practitioners and lecturers did not reveal the techniques of the practice based on the society members that have paid for instruction, veiling the idea that it was unfair to reveal the practice to others for free. Although the heightened secrecy of the practice contributed to the skepticism about it, many supporters and practitioners of animal magnetism touted the ease and possibility for everyone to acquire the skills to perform its techniques. Popularization of animal magnetism was denounced and ridiculed by newspaper journals and theater during the Romantic era. Many deemed animal magnetism to be nothing more than a theatrical falsity or quackery. In a 1790 publication, an editor presented a series of letters written by an avid supporter of animal magnetism and included his own thoughts in an appendix stating, "No fanatics ever divulged notions more wild and extravagant. No impudent empiric ever retailed promises more preposterous, or histories of cures more devoid of reality, than the tribe of magnetizers." The novelist and playwright Elizabeth Inbald wrote the farce Animal Magnetism in the late 1780s. The plot revolved around multiple love triangles and the absurdity of animal magnetism. The following passage mocks the medical prowess of those qualified only as mesmerists. "Doctor, they have refused to grant me a diploma, forbid me to practice as a physician, and all because I don't know a parcel of insignificant words, but exercise my profession according to the rules of reason and nature. Is it not natural to die? Then if a dozen or two of my patients have died under my hands, is not that natural?" Although the doctor's obsession with the use of animal magnetism, not merely to cure, but to force his ward to fall in love with him, made for a humorous storyline, Inchbald's light-hearted play commented on what society perceived as threats posed by the practice. De Menanduc brought animal magnetism to England in 1787 and promulgated it into the social arena. In 1785, he had published proposals to the ladies of Britain to establish a hygiene society or society of health, by which they would pay to join and enjoy his treatments. As both popularity and skepticism increased, many became convinced that animal magnetism could lead to sexual exploitation of women. Not only did the practice involve close personal contact via the waving of hands over the body, but people were concerned that the animal magnetists could hypnotize women and direct them at will. Having removed all misconceptions such as foretelling of the future, explicit or implicit invocation of the devil, The use of animal magnetism is indeed merely an act of making use of physical media that are otherwise licit, and hence it is not morally forbidden, provided it does not tend toward an illicit end or toward anything depraved. The Sacred Congregation of the Holy Office, July 28, 1847. The French Revolution catalyzed existing internal political friction in Britain in the 1790s. A few political radicals used animal magnetism as more than just a moral threat, but also a political threat. Major politicians and people in power were accused by radicals of practicing animal magnetism on the general population. In his article, Under the Influence, Mesmerism in England, Roy Porter notes that James Tilly Matthews suggested that the French were infiltrating England via animal magnetism. Matthews believed that magnetic spies would invade England and bring it under subjection by transmitting waves of animal magnetism to subdue the government and people. Such an invasion from foreign influences was perceived as a radical threat. During the Romantic period, mesmerism produced enthusiasm and inspired horror in the spiritual and religious context. Though discredited as a medical practice, mesmerism created a venue for spiritual healing. Some animal magnetists advertised their practices by stressing the spiritual rather than physical benefits to be gained from animal magnetism, and were able to gather a good clientele from among the spiritually inspired population. Mesmerism has been used in parts of the world as an attempt to treat illness in humans, as well as disease in domestic, farm, circus, and zoo animals. Authors Johann Peter Lang and Alan Kardec wrote that the source of Jesus' miracles was animal magnetism. Others, like John Campbell Colquhoun and Mary Baker Eddy, denounced the comparison. Mary Baker Eddy went so far as to claim animal magnetism leads to moral and to physical death. In the classical era of animal magnetism, the late 17th century to the mid-19th century, there were professional magnetizers whose techniques were described by authors of the time as particularly effective. Their method was to spend prolonged periods magnetizing their customers directly or through mesmeric magnets. It was observed that in some conditions, certain mesmerizers were more likely to achieve the result than others, regardless of their degree of knowledge.